This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Monday, September 28th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees, so our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate your staying with us on Africa 54. Weeks after heavy rains triggered major flooding in Senegal's capital, Dakar, areas of stagnant waters remain, exposing a gap in funding that authorities had promised would avert such crises. David Doyle reports.
On the outskirts of Senegal's capital, Dakar, floodwaters have turned green as algae makes a home in streets abandoned by many residents. 2 weeks after a wet season's worth of rain fell in just a few hours, and some locals say it's not just the waters that have been left to stagnate. On that day, Al-Haj Sahir Sal, leader of the Keur Massar neighbourhood, worked from 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. bailing out people's homes.
After that, we placed bricks in the neighbourhood streets so people could circulate. We only helped ourselves. We received no official help, no financial help.
After widespread floods in 2009 and 2012, authorities promised future crises would be averted through a flood management plan worth 766 billion CFA francs, or around $1.4 billion US. But a 2014 report from the World Bank-managed Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery expressed concern that over 90% of the plan had not been funded. The World Bank won't reveal the current size of the shortfall, but said the government is working to close the gap. President Macky Sall's office did not respond to a request for comment. But with 16,700 people critically impacted by the latest deluge, according to figures from the Red Cross, civil society groups and opposition leaders want to know what's happened. Zeinul Abidine Gay, Chief of Staff for the Mayor of Keur Massar, said progress is being made.
To get rid of floods, it's simple. We'll need drainage, so we're 50 years late and we have to make up for it. That's what the government is trying to do.
He said 20 drains have been dug in the area, but that the population is really dense, so the efforts are never enough. In Dakar's Yamboul district, a system was built to funnel away excess water. But floods returned this year anyway.
We had a pump installed over there.
Resident Ismail Afey says there's been a lack of maintenance.
But unfortunately, that pump hasn't worked since 2014.
And meanwhile, the threat to such neighbourhoods is rising. Research says floods in West Africa increased from an average of 2 per year in the 1990s to more than 8 in the 2000s.
David Doyle of Reuters with that report. The U.S. announced $152 million in new aid to the Sahel region of Africa to support the strategically important but fragile region. VOA Salem Solomon has the story.
The U.S. Special Envoy to the Sahel, J. Peter Pham, announced the humanitarian aid following a trip to West Africa where he visited Mauritania and Niger. The Sahel is plagued by extremist violence, a harsh and changing climate, and political instability. During a conference call hosted by the Wilson Center's Africa program, Pham said the U.S. has a continued commitment.
More than 2.5 million people in the Sahel region are displaced. 3.3 are in need of humanitarian assistance and protection services. And the United States is proud to be the largest donor of humanitarian assistance to the region.
The funding will assist some of the most vulnerable populations in Burkina Faso, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger. The assistance will now go to the Malian military officers who recently took power in a coup. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also explained where the fund will go. Significant gaps in meeting humanitarian needs, in addition to environmental concerns such as major flooding across the region, have been further exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic, he said in a statement. Pompeo said that programs funded by the aid will provide jobs, shelter, healthcare, food aid, drinking water and hygiene services to people at risk. More than 4,000 people died in terror attacks in the Sahel in 2019, making it the deadliest year on record for extremist violence. A military coup in Mali this year threatened to further destabilize the country, beset by violence since last military coup in 2012. And Niger is being hit with historic flooding that has left 330,000 homeless. Pham said he was struck by seeing the height of the Niger River and the submerged structures.
If displacement by conflict weren't enough, we now have historic flooding with unprecedented rains across the region. This is a region where water was greeted with elation, and now it's turned the other way around.
Issues of food security and poverty in the region are closely linked to personal security, since violence has led to mass displacements in several countries. Approximately 5.5 million people suffered food insecurity in the region this summer in what is known as the lean season, the World Food Programme reported.
I would say for the ordinary man, woman, and child, the key issue in their daily life is security and livelihood. This has always been a fragile region, and in recent years it's only, unfortunately, grown even more fragile, and it hangs by a very narrow thread.
Pham said despite the daunting challenges, there is some cause for optimism on the political front. In Niger, President Mahamadou Youssoufou says after his second term in office is complete this year, he will step aside to make way for a peaceful transition of power.
When that occurs in Niger, it's going to be the first ever in the country's history of an elected president ceding power to whoever is elected his successor. That's a historic moment in the country's history, and it's a good sign. It's another, if you will, good characteristic to be encouraged. Democratic and inclusive government can be a bulwark against the further spread of violence. And that's why we're pressing for free and fair elections this year in Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Ghana, and next year in Benin.
Pham added he hopes this serves as a model for other countries on the continent. Salim Solomon, VOA News, Washington.
A retired colonel is Mali's new interim president. He is charged with presiding over a return to civilian rule following a military coup. Lorraine Anthony has the details.
Retired Colonel Barton Dow was sworn in as Mali's interim president on Friday, tasked with presiding over a transition back to civilian rule following August's military coup. 70-year-old Ndow also served as defense minister in 2014 and previously headed up the Air Force.
Je jure devant Dieu et le peuple malien.
He took an oath of office in front of several hundred military officers, political leaders and diplomats. The transition is expected to take 18 months.
Oui. Il ne faut pas avoir peur des mots.
Yes, we should not be afraid to say it. Mali has been shaken, trampled on and humiliated. Shaken, weakened and humiliated by its own children, by us.
Par nous-mêmes. Je combattrai sans concession les scrutins au coût astronomique.
I will fight without compromise over expensive elections, electoral fraud, vote buying and the government manipulation of the electoral process.
L'achat de voix, l'incursion de l'administration dans le processus électoral.
Colonel Assimi Goïta, who led the August 18th coup that overthrew Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta as president, was also sworn in as vice president during the ceremony in Bamako. Malian officials hope the inauguration will lead to the lifting of what they call paralysing sanctions imposed by ECOWAS. Regional presidents who are fearful that the coup could undermine a regional fight against Islamist militants centred in Mali's northern centre hope the ceremony will be a first step towards civilian rule. But their initial demands for a purely civilian leadership have not been met. ECOWAS has demanded the appointment of a civilian president and prime minister, the dissolution of the ruling junta, and guarantees that the vice president could not become president, conditions that have not all been satisfied thus far.
Lorraine Anthony of Reuters with that report. Staying in Mali, former Mali Foreign Minister Moctar Ouane was named to the Prime Minister's post Sunday by new transitional President Bando. Ouane served as foreign minister from 2004 to 2011 after representing Mali as its envoy to the United Nations from 1995 to 2002. The installation of Ouane as Prime Minister could lead to the removal of sanctions imposed on Mali by ECOWAS. ECOWAS suspended all financial transactions between Mali and its 14 other member states and closed their shared borders after the coup. One way to reframe the way the people, places, and cultures on the African continent are viewed is through imagery. So Hedy Adams-Fitzpatrick dropped in on a Kenyan photographer during one of her shoots in Nairobi. Thandwe Murio says the perfect picture is about tone, texture, color, and context. And that's why her focus is on African women.
My name is Thandwe Murio, a photographer based in Nairobi, Kenya. I describe my work as unapologetically African because I want to celebrate the positive things about being an African. So often our continent is projected as this poor place full of suffering, and we're not perfect, but there's so many beautiful things about Africa, and I want to celebrate those in my work. I think what's missing from the narrative about Africa and its people is our voice. So often we've had so many other people come to tell our story. I think it's one thing to have our story told by somebody from outside our context, but there's things that we see that they may not necessarily see because we live here, we have community here. I think now is an exciting time to be an African because we're really owning our voice. Before we were shy, a little scared maybe to talk about to celebrate ourselves. And I'm so excited to be part of the movement that's happening now where everybody is beginning to wake up and look around them and say, we have so much to celebrate, we have so much to contribute and share with the continent and the world. Recently in my work, I have been drawn to our history as Kenya and Africa in general, looking at what kind of traditional hairstyles did we have, what kind of traditional clothing did we have, and taking those elements and modernizing them and adding the pop of color that I have in my work and making modern nods to history. It's amazing how much beauty there is just in this one continent, all the way from South Africa, all the way up. You can just find such different features, such different hair, such different skin tones. I remember growing up as a child, I always felt frustrated. Why is my hair not longer? Why is my nose not more narrow? Why are my lips so big? And it took me a while as a photographer to realize, hold on, there's nothing wrong with me. And I want to pass that message to other women through my work, that you are beautiful with your short hair, you're beautiful with your big lips, you're beautiful with a larger nose. There's nothing wrong with those things. And in fact, those are what make us unique and beautiful. When I finished university, I was feeling pressure to be what every African parent wants their child to be, a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. And I really struggled with the question of, can I do photography for the rest of my life? Fortunately, my father had coffee with me one day and he told me, why are you considering other jobs? You love photography, so be a photographer. And it was the most liberating conversation I've ever had in my life. I think just because of all the stereotypes around being an artist in Africa, I was afraid to go for it. And having that conversation released me to truly enjoy exploring my photography. I think as women, we have something unique to offer the art world. We see things differently. We appreciate beauty in a different way from men. And so I hope that hearing my story is what will drive a girl somewhere in Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda to say, you know what, I want to be a photographer when I grow up.
VOA's Hedy Adams-Fitzpatrick produced that report. We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered during the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, a look at Tuesday's U.S. presidential debate. Stay with us. Welcome back to Africa 54. With just 36 days to go before the U.S. presidential election, battle lines are being drawn over President Donald Trump's nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the U.S. Supreme Court. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden is calling on Republican senators not to confirm her before the November 3rd election to allow U.S. voters to have a say, a view key Republican leaders dismissed. Michelle Quinn reports.
This week, Judge Amy Coney Barrett will meet with U.S. Senate leaders in advance of her confirmation hearings to be the next Supreme Court justice, a lifetime appointment. Majority Republicans appear to have the votes to confirm Barrett, and President Donald Trump says it's important to have a full bench of 9 justices in case they are called on to decide the outcome if the November 3rd presidential election is in dispute.
I think it's better if you go before the election because I think this scam that the Democrats are pulling, it's a scam. This scam will be before the United States Supreme Court, and I think having a 4-4 situation is not a good situation.
Trump has warned, with little evidence, of widespread voter fraud involving mail-in ballots. And if Republicans challenge the election in court, the case could go to the nation's top court, where Judge Barrett's vote could prevent a tie. In a recent New York Times Siena College poll, 56% of Americans said the next president should choose the nominee. Joe Biden, the Democratic presidential nominee, called on Republicans to let the voters pick the president before confirming the next justice.
Just because you have the power to do something doesn't absolve you of your responsibility to do right by the American people.
While some Democratic senators say they won't meet with Judge Barrett this week, others, like Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, say they will question her conservative credentials and her opinions about health care and abortion rights.
We could slow it down, perhaps a matter of hours, maybe days at the most, but we can't stop the outcome. What we should do is to address this now respectfully.
Durbin said Barrett should recuse herself now from any decisions the court may face regarding the 2020 election. But Mike Lee, a Republican senator from Utah, disagrees.
Whether she recuses in this or any other case is up to her, and is up to her in consultation with her colleagues, her staff, and the rules at play.
With a seat now open on the nation's top court, an already contentious presidential race has become even more high stakes. Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
The first U.S. presidential debate pitting President Donald Trump against former Democratic Vice President Joe Biden takes place Tuesday in Cleveland, Ohio. This is the first of 3 debates in which the two will appear face-to-face. The election campaign is close, both nationally and in Ohio, a swing state where voters' opinions about the two candidates differ sharply from one household to the next. VOA's Caroline Presutti is in Cleveland for the debates.
This Trump flag was the first sign of politics in this Ohio neighborhood.
I debated whether to put it up or not because I was afraid my house might get shot at. And then I thought, you know what, I'm not living in fear.
But then, across the street, a Biden supporter, a friend of 44 years.
Whoever is going to be in charge just needs to lead us and be nice and smart and democratic.
Yeah, I hope the best man wins.
I didn't think they were oh, he will.
Ohio is a crucial state. No Republican has ever won the presidency without winning Ohio. President Trump won the state by 8 points in 2016. But this year, polls show only a few points separating him from Democratic challenger Joe Biden, as neighbors and sometimes families split their allegiance.
Half of my kids are Trump supporters, so we don't invite them over anymore, no. No. They can't come over until next year, so, you know what I mean? So we say we aren't going to talk about politics, even though we do, and then we stop it.
Across the country, polarization of Trump and Biden supporters can deeply affect families. Case Western Reserve's Joe White teaches American politics and the presidency.
Republicans are more upset about the possibility of their child marrying a person of the same gender or who is transgender. Democrats are much more upset about the idea of their child marrying a Republican.
Going to get a wheel put riding with Biden too. I think I'm going to decorate the whole front lawn. No,
how about hiding with Biden?
Dolores Gentili says her friendship with Patty Lucci rises above politics.
I like Trump. They like Biden. So what? One of them's going to win.
The first presidential debate Tuesday at Case Western Reserve University, not far from their houses, is expected to be contentious.
Vice President Biden will presumably be trying to walk a fine line of some sort, but he also wants to find ways to make Trump look as bad as possible, which may mean baiting him.
The debate venue in Cleveland awaits the two men to discuss their records, the Supreme Court, the coronavirus pandemic, election security, and the economy. Another topic, racial justice protests that have at times triggered rioting and looting.
That's why I'm voting for President Trump, because it seems like the Democratic Party has not condemned any of this.
I just think Trump says, I think he's mean. That's what I think upsets me. I think he says really mean things.
A new poll shows that 2 out of 3 Ohioans say that politics has strained their relationship with family and friends. They say they cope by avoiding any election talk. Instead, they'll leave the real debating up to the two candidates here at this pavilion on Tuesday. Carolyn Presutti, VOA News, Cleveland, Ohio.
Avoiding any major mistakes is a principal goal for President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden in their first debate Tuesday, September 29. VOA Steve Reddish looks at some of the historic debate moments that shaped U.S. politics.
The candidates need no introduction. The Republican candidate, Vice President Richard M. Nixon, and the Democratic candidate, Senator John F. Kennedy.
From Kennedy versus Nixon to Clinton versus Trump, presidential debates have generated special, sometimes career-defining moments, leaving an indelible mark on American politics.
Almost always, every debate cycle I can remember, something happened in one of those debates that, despite the candidate, showed the American people something that they needed to know about the candidate.
For Walter Mondale, it happened twice when he challenged President Ronald Reagan seeking his second term.
Reagan wasn't really following his script very well. And he'd get into these speeches and he'd get lost in the middle of it. He'd forget where he's going.
That 2/3 of the defense budget pays for pay and salary, or pay and pension. And then you add to that food and wardrobe and all the other things, and you only have a small portion going for weapons.
We don't get too many opportunities to see the candidates unfiltered and side by side and on live television without the mediation of journalists or without the handlers right there affecting how and what they say.
Alan Schroeder is a journalism professor at Northeastern University. He wrote a book on TV's role in presidential debates, starting with the first one in 1960 between John Kennedy and Richard Nixon.
Nixon, having just been released a few weeks earlier from the hospital, had lost a lot of weight, was very pallid, didn't really put on the makeup that he should have had put on, and was sweating and was underweight and just didn't look well on camera.
As we know, Nixon refused to have any makeup, and so he looked like he had a shadow. For those who listened on the radio, they thought Nixon won. For those who watched TV, they thought, Kennedy won.
Frank Sesno is Director of Strategic Initiatives at George Washington University and covered the White House for CNN.
There was the famous moment way back when Gerald Ford was running where he tried to suggest that Poland was not part of the Soviet Empire.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
If you go back and look, the moderator is almost sort of speechless.
Mary Kate Carey teaches political science and is a senior fellow at the University of Virginia Miller Center. She was a speechwriter for the first President George Bush when he debated Ross Perot and Bill Clinton in 1992.
One of the two of them had violated the rules, was going way over their time, and Carol Simpson was not enforcing the rules. George Bush does one of these, basically starts pointing at his watch as a signal to her to please enforce the rules. And the audience doesn't know the rules. And the audience thinks he's looking at his watch because he's got something better to do and he wants to go get a hamburger or something. And it totally backfired on George Bush.
In this instance, George Bush didn't want to be there. He didn't think he needed to prove himself to the voters in that way. And it's interesting, years later, when he was interviewed by Jim Lehrer about that moment, that's what he said. I didn't want to be there.
Whatever doubts were raised by his performance in his first debate with Mondale in 1984, Ronald Reagan had the last laugh about whether he was too old for the job.
And I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Well, I was laughing about it because I thought it was a joke. And at the same hand, I think he landed a blow there. It was pretty effective. And between my laughter, there was a few tears coming down there.
Mondale lost to Reagan by a landslide. Steve Reddish, VOA News, Washington.
That's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com from all of us here in Washington. Thank you for watching.